On October 30th, 1975, New Yorkers woke up to the headline Ford to City, drop dead. In a city where 10% of people were out of work and 65,000 jobs vanished overnight, survival meant paying $200 in rent for apartments barely held together and wondering each day who would leave next. This was what it was like to live in New York City in the 1970s, struggling through collapse, yet somehow holding on. How did a place on the edge become ground zero for America's cultural revolution? The city's finances weren't just shaky, they were on the edge of collapse. In the spring of 1975, the banks stopped lending. Suddenly, New York couldn't pay its bills. City Hall called emergency press conferences. Budget charts showed a mountain of debt, over $13 billion owed, and no cash to cover the basics. To keep the lights on, a new agency, the Municipal Assistance Corporation, or MAC, stepped in. Led by Wall Street banker Felix Rohatyn, the Emergency Financial Control Board, packed with state appointees, took control of the city's checkbook. Every promise of help came with a demand for cuts. Pink slips landed everywhere. Sanitation workers found out on a Friday afternoon they were done. Teachers, cops, firefighters, tens of thousands lost their jobs. In just a few years, about 60,000 city jobs disappeared. For those left, paychecks froze, overtime vanished, and the threat of more layoffs hung in the air. One day you were a city employee. The next, you stood in line at the unemployment office, wondering how to pay rent or feed your family. Unemployment hit 10%, higher in the Bronx and Brooklyn. Welfare rolls swelled. The city's safety net started to fray. Whole neighborhoods emptied out. Over 800,000 people left New York in the 1970s, most heading for the suburbs. Apartment buildings went dark, storefronts shuttered, playgrounds grew weeds. The middle class packed up, leaving behind a city that felt abandoned and adrift. At the same time, the city's leaders huddled with bankers pleading for one more loan, one more extension. Federal aid only came after months of brinkmanship. And even then, it was a lifeline tied to strict austerity. The city felt like it was shrinking budgets, shrinking services, shrinking hope. Yet every morning, millions still got up and tried to make it work, living through a crisis that felt endless, but somehow never broke the city's spirit. A rent-controlled apartment in Manhattan could cost as little as $150 a month, sometimes $300 if you wanted a doorman or a working elevator. Classified ads in the Daily News promised sunny, two-bedroom, $225, West End Avenue, rent stabilized. In Brooklyn or Harlem, whole brownstones changed hands for $15,000 to $30,000, less than the price of a new Cadillac. But the low numbers came with a catch. The heat clanked on and off if it worked at all. Hot water ran brown, then cold, then nothing. Peeling paint, cracked linoleum, and warped floorboards were standard. Tenants stuffed towels around rattling window frames to keep out the winter wind. Some nights, the only way to get warm was to turn on the oven and leave the door open. Cheap rent meant you lived with whatever the landlord refused to fix. Hallways went dark for weeks. Elevators broke and stayed broken. In the South Bronx and on the Lower East Side, you might wake to the smell of smoke. Another building burned for insurance. Another row of windows boarded up. Kids played on stoops surrounded by empty lots and rubble. If you wanted to buy, you bought a shell and did the work yourself, learning plumbing from neighbors and patching roofs with whatever you could haul up the stairs. Inside, the look was pure 1970s. Shag carpeting, wood paneling, avocado green appliances, and macrame plant hangers drooping from the ceiling. Bead curtains separated rooms. The furniture was whatever you could find on the curb or at a thrift shop. People got creative, bathtubs and kitchens, extension cords snaking from one outlet to the next, space heaters humming through the night. The city was your landlord, your handyman, and sometimes your adversary. Survival meant banding together. Tenants formed associations, held rent strikes, and shared tips on which city offices would actually answer the phone. Every dollar saved on rent bought a little more time, a little more freedom, and the hope that next month you would still have a place to call home. By 1977, fear was routine in New York. Murders neared 1,800 a year. There were 1,557 in 1977 alone. Robberies and assaults blurred into daily life. People stashed a $20 bill, mugger money, in a separate pocket, hoping it would buy safety if threatened. On the subway, riders clustered near the conductor, never at the ends, eyes fixed ahead, bags gripped tight. Empty cars after dark were a risk no one took. Trust in the police had eroded. The NYPD lost nearly 5,000 officers to layoffs and hiring freezes after the fiscal crisis. Response times stretched. Some neighborhoods felt deserted, left to whoever claimed the streets. The Son of Sam haunted the city, 6 dead, 7 wounded. But most violence went unreported, just background noise. Then on July 13th, 1977, lightning struck power lines north of the city. In minutes, New York went dark. For 25 hours, the blackout unleashed chaos. Looters hit more than 1,600 stores. Fires burned in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Harlem. More than 3,000 people were arrested, the most for a single event in city history. Insurance claims soared to $300 million. Some blocks organized, guarding storefronts, and directing traffic by flashlight, but in others, desperation took over. The blackout exposed how thin the line was between order and collapse. By decade's end, fear found a new answer. In 1979, teenagers in red berets began patrolling the subways. They called themselves the Guardian Angels. They were not police, but they were visible, riding graffiti-tagged trains and offering protection that felt real. For commuters, it was a sign. If help was not coming, you looked out for each other. The city was dangerous, but alive, every day a test of the nerve and luck. This was a time when the city's darkness didn't just swallow hope. It sparked something wild and new. On the Bowery, a battered club called CBGB opened its doors in 1973. The rent was cheap, the bathrooms were terrifying, and the stage was barely a stage at all. But every night, bands like the Ramones, Patti Smith, Television, and Blondie turned that room into a launch pad. Punk wasn't about polish, it was about urgency, about making noise when the world felt like it was falling apart. You could feel sweat drip from the ceiling, hear guitars cut through the hum of broken neon and traffic outside. Up in the Bronx, the energy took a different shape. In August 1973, DJ Kool Herc wired his sound system into the rec room at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. He looped the breakbeats, stretched the music, and watched as kids who had grown up dodging burned-out buildings turned cardboard into dance floors. They called it hip-hop. Born out of blackout nights, block parties, and a need to claim joy in the ruins. No money for instruments, so they used turntables. No stage, so they used the street. Downtown, abandoned factories became Soho lofts where artists painted murals on crumbling brick and threw parties that lasted till dawn. Uptown, the subway cars became moving canvases, names like TAKI 183 and Phase 2 tagged across the city. Their graffiti, both a rebellion and a signature. When Studio 54 opened in 1977, velvet ropes and strobe lights hid the city's scars for a few hours each night. Inside, Andy Warhol and Bianca Jagger danced with strangers, disco and sweat, blurring class and color. The city was broke, dangerous, and often broken. But every night, in clubs and on corners, people invented new ways to be alive. Creativity wasn't a luxury, it was survival. New York's grit and chaos in the 1970s fueled a creative legacy that still shapes global culture. Today, as cities wrestle with rising costs and shrinking space for artists, the lesson endures. True innovation thrives in days where comfort runs out. What would we risk for that kind of freedom now?